Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. Cast, me, 26M, Jake. My mother, 52F, Sarah, my brother, 25M, Ethan, my sister, 32F, Olivia cheating stepdad, 47M, Mike stepdad's co-worker, 27F, Tina, the other woman, Tilda, 42F, Rachel. This might be a long one, so buckle up. I moved in with my mom after her 25-year marriage to my biological dad fell apart in 2020. He was a manipulative jerk, but that's a story for another day. Not long after the divorce, my mom introduced me to her boyfriend at the time, Mike. Now, my mom worked as a correctional officer at the county jail. Mike was a former inmate, serving time for a DUI. That should have been a red flag, but my mom was still reeling from her long marriage ending, and I didn't want to push the issue. Mike seemed to make her happy, and that was enough for me. Ethan, Olivia, and I all moved in with Mom and Mike, and things seemed okay at first. Mike and I bonded over our love of video games, and life appeared to be on an even keel. That is, until 2022. Due to Mike's prior DUI, he had to go in regularly for probation check-ins at the courthouse. One day, he didn't return, and we started to worry. Then we received a phone call from him, from Florida. It turned out that when he arrived at the courthouse that day, he was ambushed by the FBI. His family from Florida was implicated in a series of gang and drug-related crimes, and due to a situation where he was in a vehicle during a drug handoff, he was implicated as well. He ended up agreeing to testify against his family members in exchange for a shorter sentence and was allowed to be out of prison before the trial. My mom was devastated. Over the course of many phone calls spanning a year, they worked out their marriage plans for when he returned. His boss at the ice cream shop where he worked even agreed to let him come back as the store manager. Soon after his return, the drinking started. Now, obviously, because of his DUI, Mike was no stranger to alcohol, but he began to drink more and more, to the point where he was downing half a case of beer daily. Mike was a nasty drunk. He regularly picked fights when wasted, and while they never got physical, he wasn't exactly kind with his words. One night, after a particularly heated argument, I confronted Mike. "Don't you think you're drinking too much?" I asked. Mike sneered at me. "Mind your own business, kid. You don't know what I'm going through." I shot back, "We're all going through something, Mike, but we don't use it as an excuse to treat others like crap." My mom enabled his behavior for several years, saying the stress from work and the upcoming trial was getting to him. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, my mom had enough. Mike came home extremely drunk one night, and my mom confronted him. "Have you been drinking again?" she demanded. Mike slurred, "What's it to you?" That was the last straw. Mom kicked him out, and he went to live with a friend temporarily. The next morning, Mom asked us to help gather a few of his essentials so that he didn't have to re-enter the home until he was sober. While we were gathering his things, we heard a knock at the front door. We opened it to find Tina, one of Mike's co-workers and someone I went to high school with. She told my mom she had something important to share. After sitting my mom down and telling her not to reveal her source, Tina spilled the beans. Mike was cheating on my mom with Rachel. He regularly had Rachel perform sexual acts in and around his workplace. Tina had caught them, and Mike had threatened to fire her if she ever told my mom. He was the store manager after all. And the kicker? Rachel was pregnant. My mom was furious. After the initial shock wore off, she told us to round up all of Mike's things and dump them outside. We took everything of his out of the house and tossed it all in the alley behind our house. Mike had no reason or ability to return to the house. It was rented with only my mom on the paperwork, so no issues there. In the meantime, she called and confronted him. He confessed to the entire affair and had the audacity to say he was happy Rachel was pregnant because that meant he'd finally have a child of his own. Mom refused to have more kids, as we three had been massive strains on her body and she likely wouldn't survive anymore. He refused to apologize for any of his actions. As we were throwing his stuff out, Olivia turned to me and Ethan. "Guys, we can't let him get away with this. Mom deserves better." Ethan nodded. "You're right. But what can we do?" I smiled grimly. "I have a few ideas." My mom arranged for him to collect his items from the alley, with an officer present, and he left our lives. Or so we thought. The revenge. While my mom wanted to wash her hands of Mike and move on, Olivia, Ethan, and I had other plans. First, we called his workplace. The ice cream shop operates as an independently owned franchise, and the owner of this branch owned several in the area. He was also a family friend. We informed him of the sexual acts being performed on the premises, and he went through the process of getting Mike booted from his position and barred from any of the branches in the area. Interestingly, Tina got his position after he left and now runs a tight and clean ship. Mike no longer had a job or a place to live, so he went to live with Rachel in a town about an hour away. We found out that he started working at another ice cream shop in that town and informed the owner there of the situation. It took significantly longer due to there being no current indecent actions occurring there, but eventually he lost that job too. Soon after, Mike began driving around our neighborhood, seemingly stalking my mom and our family, probably because of his job loss. Now, due to the whole situation in Florida, he never had his probation lifted for his DUI and thus still did not have a license. He never had to drive when he lived with us since work was local and we could drive him as needed. But here he was, clearly driving around by himself when he shouldn't be. We contacted the police and informed them about Rachel's vehicle in our neighborhood and that we believed Mike was driving it without a license. We told them to pull over the vehicle next time they saw it, as it would likely be Mike driving again. Sure enough, a few weeks later, we were told that Mike indeed was pulled over and sent back to the local jail for driving without a license and while intoxicated. The police also did a search of the home he was staying at and found several guns on the premises. Since he was a felon, he was not legally allowed to have weaponry on the premises, meaning there was more jail time tacked on. By the time his jail time had finished, it was just in time for him to be sent back to incarceration in Florida for the trial. Mike's son was born while Mike was in prison. Rachel evidently realized what an absolute jerk Mike was and cut ties with him while he was incarcerated. During his prison time, Mike started sending tons of letters to my mom, stating how sorry he was, pleading to take him back, and ranting about how it wasn't his fault, all in the same letter, mind you. Mom burnt every one of them. We moved on, relocating to another state. Mike evidently got out of prison last year and now lives in Georgia, struggling and fighting child support, which Rachel sued him for. Mom now has a new boyfriend who treats her right and cares a lot more than Mike ever did. Ethan and Olivia moved on and out, and I still live with Mom, assisting her with the newly purchased home that we've been renovating. Life's looking up. I was reminded of this by a chat with a coworker about cheaters, and thought to share it here for others to learn from our experience. The next one is an entitled people story. I never thought I'd witness something so cruel in my life, especially not at a place meant for fun and laughter. It was a sunny Saturday afternoon, and I had taken my niece to the local park. The playground was bustling with kids running around, their excited shrieks filling the air. As we approached the swing set, I noticed a young boy, probably around 8 or 9 years old, carefully making his way towards it. He had a prosthetic arm, and though he moved a bit slower than the other kids, his face was lit up with a bright smile. I couldn't help but admire his determination. Just as the boy was about to reach the swings, a woman in her mid-30s came stomping over, dragging a whining girl behind her. I immediately sensed trouble. The woman had that entitled look about her, designer sunglasses perched on her nose, perfectly manicured nails, and a scowl that could curdle milk. "Excuse me," she snapped at the boy. "My daughter wants to use the swings. You need to leave." The poor kid looked up at her, confused. "But I just got here. Can't we take turns?" That's when things took a horrifying turn. This woman, this Karen, actually reached out and shoved the boy, hard. He stumbled backward, losing his balance and falling onto the ground with a painful thud. I was frozen in shock for a moment, unable to believe what I'd just seen. The boy's eyes welled up with tears, more from the shock and humiliation than physical pain, I think. But Karen wasn't done. She turned to her daughter, who looked about the same age as the boy, and said in a sickly sweet voice, "Sweetie, why don't you go pull off his fake arm? Then he won't be able to use the swings at all." My blood ran cold. Was this woman for real? Before I could react, her kid actually started approaching the boy, who was now cowering on the ground, clutching his prosthetic arm protectively. That's when I snapped out of my shock. No way was I going to let this continue. I rushed over, positioning myself between Karen's kid and the boy on the ground. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I shouted at Karen, my voice shaking with anger. "You just assaulted a child!" Karen's face contorted with rage. "Mind your own business. This little freak was hogging the swings. My precious angel deserves to play without looking at his disgusting fake arm." I couldn't believe my ears. How could anyone be so heartless? I helped the boy to his feet, making sure he was okay. Then I turned back to Karen, my phone already in my hand. "I'm calling the police," I said firmly. "What you did is assault, and encouraging your child to harm another kid is beyond despicable." Karen's face paled slightly, but she quickly regained her bravado. "Go ahead, call them. They won't do anything. Do you know who my husband is? He's friends with the police chief." I ignored her empty threats and dialed cop, quickly explaining the situation to the dispatcher. As I was on the phone, other parents who had witnessed the incident came over to support us. One mom had even recorded the whole thing on her phone. While we waited for the police, I comforted the boy, whose name was Tommy. He told me he'd only recently gotten his prosthetic arm and was still getting used to it. My heart ached for him, but I was impressed by his resilience. Karen, meanwhile, was busy trying to rally support from other parents, spinning some ridiculous story about how Tommy had been bullying her daughter. But nobody was buying it. They'd all seen what really happened. When the police arrived, they took statements from everyone, including Tommy and his mom, who had rushed to the park after I called her. The officer watching the video evidence looked disgusted. "Ma'am," he said to Karen, "you're under arrest for assault on a minor and attempted battery by proxy." Karen's face turned an impressive shade of purple. "You can't arrest me! Don't you know who I am? I'll have your badge for this." The officer just rolled his eyes and started reading her rights as he cuffed her. Karen's daughter burst into tears, and I felt a pang of sympathy for her. It wasn't her fault her mom was such a monster. As Karen was being led away, still shouting threats, Tommy's mom came over to thank me. She was in tears, both angry at what had happened and grateful that someone had stepped in to help. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't been here," she said, hugging me tightly. I assured her it was no problem, that anyone would have done the same, but looking around, I wasn't so sure. Too many people had initially just stood by and watched. In the days that followed, I gave a formal statement to the police and agreed to testify if the case went to court. Tommy's family pressed charges, and Karen was facing some serious consequences for her actions. The incident made local news, sparking outrage in the community. There was an outpouring of support for Tommy, with people organizing a fundraiser to help cover any medical expenses and therapy he might need after the traumatic experience. A few weeks later, I received a call from Tommy's mom. She told me that Karen had been convicted of assault and attempted battery by proxy. She was sentenced to community service, anger management classes, and had to pay a hefty fine. More importantly, she was banned from the park and had to stay away from Tommy and his family. Tommy, she told me, was doing much better. The support from the community had boosted his confidence, and he was back to enjoying the park without fear. His mom invited me to a small gathering they were having to thank everyone who had helped. When I arrived at the party, I was touched to see Tommy running around with other kids, laughing and playing like nothing had ever happened. He spotted me and came running over, giving me a big hug with both arms, his real one and his prosthetic. "Thank you for saving me," he said, looking up at me with a grin. I ruffled his hair, feeling a lump in my throat. "You're welcome, buddy. But you know what? You're the real hero here. You're so brave and strong." As I watched Tommy run off to play with his friends, I felt a sense of relief and hope. What happened that day in the park was horrible, but the way the community came together to support Tommy and stand up against bullying was truly inspiring. I realized that day how important it is to speak up and take action when we see injustice. One person can make a difference, and together we can create a community where everyone feels safe and respected, regardless of their differences. The next one is a malicious compliance story. Back in my days working for a Big 5 consulting company, we were mandated to attend several courses. The one that relates to the story was called Corporate Image, and was about looking the part, being well-dressed and such. Being that the company had a strictly suit policy, the idea of the course was kind of an indoctrination to the Barney Stinson's school of dressing. I was having a particularly rough day that day, so we could say that my attitude towards the course wasn't the best, and I sat in the back. The guy in charge, let's call him Corpo, starts the course by showing a video of a guy wearing flip-flops, bathing suit, t-shirt with surfer logos, badly trimmed beard and ponytail, explaining some technical stuff in the most boring way, stuttering and showcasing a poor knowledge of the subject. After the video finishes, Corpo asks if we think that the guy is a good communicator and that the message got through. Everybody says no. Corpo asks why. People start saying that he doesn't look the part. Then Corpo asks me. I reply, "Because he's boring as a white wall and doesn't know the subject well enough." Corpo doubles down. "Don't you think that the way he's dressed has something to do with it?" I say, "If he's good, knows his stuff and communicates well, we could be fully naked for all I care." Everybody laughs, except Corpo. Corpo starts a full 15-minute rant about how looking the part, how wearing a suit is the most important thing because it makes someone believable and trustworthy and blah blah blah. I interrupt him once to say, "Lawyers are among the most untrustworthy people on earth and they all wear suits." He continues his rant by saying that nobody would trust a lawyer without a suit and blah blah blah. Okay, so this is how we roll. Suits are the most important thing, and this is how you expect us to reply. Fine, I will comply. Fast forward to later in the course. He shows footage of Steve Jobs and Steve Ballmer talking, engaging with the audience, and being generally well regarded as good spokespersons while wearing their typical outfits, which, guess what, are not suits. When the QA about the Steve's videos start, I say, "They don't look trustworthy." two of the top 20 rich people in the world, and they wear something that I can buy for like 40 bucks at any shopping mall? Where are the suits? Corpo by then is kind of furious with me, but I've managed to engage the rest of my colleagues into my side of the equation, so we start arguing who's more trustworthy, and if the brand of suit goes directly proportional to the trustworthiness of the guy. Examples go from Pat Riley with his Armani suits to Don Corleone with his tailor-made ones. Corpo has lost the class, and everything ends prematurely when someone asks, "Wait, are military suits trustworthy or not?" Corpo gasps, thinking where the conversation could be heading, and dismisses us ahead of schedule with a, "Okay, you've all passed this course. I think we'll end it here." The next one is an entitled people story. There's this one coworker I will never forget, but like in a bad way. Ages 19, 22, I worked a Tex-Mex spot that shared a patio with the neighboring bar. I got along with the staff really well and ended up being head wait, handled the scheduling, assigned side duties to staff within a few months. A year into my stint, they hired a woman in her early 40s. She seemed really nice at first. A few red flags started to pop up. She refused to learn any Spanish to communicate with the kitchen staff, even basic words related to food ordering. Now, mind you, I spoke almost no Spanish when I started and ended up being able to communicate with the entire staff in our own broken, unique to us Spanglish. She thought it was ridiculous and insisted they just learn English, coming from the idiot that pronounced chorizo chorizo. We all kinda just tolerated her and wrote her off as being annoying. She started whining about always being broke, like us too, TF, not having enough money to feed her rescue dog or pay rent. Then she'd mosey on to the neighboring bar after work and drink for hours, every day. Very much a functional alcoholic, and I don't say that in a judgy way just to get perspective. But realizing she can't afford to feed her dog because she'd rather order 5 double top-shelf ranch waters caused me to lose all respect and most empathy for her situation. After a while, we noticed she was crying, like literally crying, to customers about her money problems. Most of them were regulars, and a few of them even asked me to stop letting her wait on them because of this. I spoke to the manager, who was a friend, and he had a talk with her and gave her a stern warning. Side note, I have always loved Halloween, and I usually request the evening of and morning after off months in advance. In this case, I asked off 2 full months in advance, and it was approved. 2 days before Halloween, she asked me to switch shifts with me, meaning I opened the day after Halloween, and I kindly told her I was sorry, but I couldn't. I already had plans and approved time off. She said, "Fine, I guess I'll just ducking kill myself," and I went, "That's not cool, dude." And she went into this long, spiraling rant about her life falling apart, and this was her one chance in a long time to be happy, and I'm just ruining it, and she might as well drink herself to death. I'm a nice person, and obvs don't want someone to kill themselves, so I have her a little pep talk about bad things being temporary, yada yada. Thought it was dealt with, so I clocked out for the day and went next door for a drink to decompress. Like 2 hours later, I get a text from one of the cooks saying she was losing her crap on them and screaming, and had even talked down to them for not speaking English. They called the manager to come up, and he promptly fired her. Now I'm next door the whole time gossiping with the bartender about how crazy this lady is. Suddenly I feel someone bear hug me tightly from behind. Before I could even register what was happening, I was all bows and curses, and I apparently elbowed her pretty hard, so she started whining. She got all defensive and said she didn't know why I was mad. I forgot that I'm so good at being polite, she somehow thought I was going to side with her. Oops. I stood up, shaking with adrenaline and rage, told her to kindly get the duck away from me as I didn't care to interact with her. Cue confused blubbering. I explained that she was disrespectful to one of our cooks who I held in high esteem, racist at best, and emotionally volatile and manipulative, and that this was her final opportunity to never touch or speak to me again, lest she face the consequences. I saw her around for a few years after that, and aside from a passive smile, she thankfully never spoke to me again. I just think it's so funny to look back on, especially being in my late 20s and working with a few younger folks now. I can't imagine threatening suicide to make them cancel Halloween plans. Like, what even is that? Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.